Welcome to Talk+Water, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of water with those making waves. My name is Todd Bottler, and I'm your host for Talk+Water. I'm also the principal of Collaborative Water Resolution, which you can find at waterdisputes.org. My guest today is Ivo Zution Gonçalves. Ivo is an agronomist engineer with a doctorate in agricultural engineering from the State University of Campinas in Brazil. I probably mispronounced that. And a master's degree in plant production from the Federal University of Espírito Santo in Brazil. He joined the Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska in June 2015 as a postdoctoral researcher, and he is currently a research assistant professor in that same program. His work focuses on applying remote sensing, evapotranspiration modeling, irrigation management, and crop modeling to support food and water security without compromising water use for other vital human and environmental needs. He has published approximately 50 peer-reviewed papers in scientific journals and has contributed to several international projects focused on water resources management, irrigation, and sustainable agricultural systems. Ivo, welcome to Talk+Water, and thank you for making time to talk with me.
Thanks, Todd, for inviting me. I'm really happy. I'm glad to be part of this podcast, Talk+Water.
Well, your research is really fascinating to me, so I've been looking forward to talking to you about it. But let's start out with your background. When did you first, become interested in water as, something you wanted to study and spend your career on?
Well, I grew up in Brazil in a small town surrounded by crop fields, mainly coffee fields and orchards on the mountains where agriculture is deeply connected to irrigation because part of the year it's very dry, rainfall is very low. And then I could see how water resource availability for irrigation affects food security, food production, and rural communities. So later, when I studied agronomy and I did my Ph.D. in water resource field, my interest became more technical because now I could understand the concept of irrigated agriculture. So ET and water resource management. So basically, my passion for water really comes from that connection between my childhood, science, food security, and people's lives.
So it's a long way from where you grew up, where it sounds like there are mountains and some orchards and things of that nature, to Nebraska. So tell us about your journey from Brazil to Nebraska, how you decided to go there and work.
Well, when I was finishing my PhD, I met my supervisor, my actual supervisor. He was attending an irrigation conference, an international conference in Brazil. I met him there. And then, Nebraska is the land of the center pivot. It's really interesting work here because that the Ogallala aquifer, water resource, and everything, we have the major center pivots companies here in Nebraska. And then he invited me to be part of his team, and then I joined, and here I am, in Nebraska. It's totally different, the climate and everything, but I really like that. I really like Nebraska because the opportunities we have here to work with water resource and irrigation.
That's great. And you get a real winter, too, in Nebraska.
Oh, winter here is not, well, we don't have that winter in Brazil. We don't have a winter in Brazil, actually, compared to Nebraska. That's the worst part that I don't like at all. It is the winter in Nebraska. However, the spring, the summer, the fall is beautiful. I really like it.
So before we talk about your article, which I've not mentioned yet, but will here in a moment. Tell us about the work in general you've been doing at the Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska.
Sure. I work, as you already have mentioned, as research assistant professor for the Dirty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, the capital of Nebraska. My work focuses on crop modeling to estimate evapotranspiration, crop development, and crop yield using remote sensing to improve agricultural water and irrigation management, supporting water policy and decision makers. I'm part of the research team that collects data in the crop field, like soil data, surface energy, and CO2 exchanging data, for example. And then we combine all those measurements with satellite imagery and weather data to estimate crop water use across large areas. So we use all this information to improve irrigation decisions and support water policies. In simple terms, my work is about turning field measurements and satellite data into practical information that helps farmers and policymakers make better decisions. And Nebraska, it is a great place for this work, as I already have mentioned. Do you know why, right? Because irrigation is extremely important here, especially in terms of center pivots irrigation system. All the main center pivots companies are from Nebraska. So our research has a very practical goal, helping farmers and water managers use water more efficiently while maintaining strong agricultural production.
So that description leads us to the paper that resulted from the data that you collected, refined, and analyzed. Just go ahead and give the title of that article, which was published in May in the Journal of Agricultural Water Management. And so the title is Irrigated Agriculture in the United States, Current Status and Future Frontiers. And I, understand that you were the lead author for this study and for the article. So please tell us a little bit more about the research that resulted in the article I just named.
That's right, Todd. I led this publication. I've been working for many years with irrigation, water research, evapotranspiration, remote sensing applied to agricultural water management. As you mentioned, I have around 50 peer-reviewed papers published in this field of research. And throughout my career, I have had the same difficulty, finding a single user-friendly and very comprehensive source of information about irrigated agriculture in the US. There are many good papers and reports about it, but they are usually focused on one stage or just one crop or one aquifer, one irrigation system, or one specific technology. So when I wanted to understand the bigger pictures, how irrigation has been expanded in the US, which states are most important, and what's the major challenge, and what the future might look like, I had to collect information from many different places. It's really hard. And then, so I had the idea for this publication. I thought, why don't we put all these informations together in a single scientific review paper? So the goal was to review the last 20 to 30 years of irrigated agriculture in the USA, especially in the most important agricultural and irrigated states, and bring all together information on water resource, water use, irrigation system, groundwater challenge, water policies, climate variability, technologies, and future opportunity in the irrigation field. In the end, we wanted the paper to be a useful reference, a document where researchers, students, water managers, policymakers, and even people from outside the US could go to better understand American irrigated agriculture and take away important insights about that.
So, as a journal editor in chief and as a reader, I love status and trends articles, and it's hard to find them. I don't know why researchers don't like to write them or whatever it is, but those articles are read by such a broad audience. I mean, especially people involved with decision making with regard to water. That's just so useful. So, for me, I've had a lot of questions about what's been going on with agriculture in the last couple of decades since, I guess, about maybe 10 years ago or so, the U.S. Geological Survey stopped publishing its big report with kind of the status of water use in the United States that had a breakdown of what was going on in irrigation. And so I've been okay, I'm not finding this anymore. And so when I saw your paper, I got very excited. So let me go to, the first, I guess, specific question about your article. And what I'm essentially doing for the listeners at home is you, at the beginning of your article, kind of listed your highlighted findings, your major findings. And so we're just going to work through that list. And so the first finding that you list for the study is that U.S. irrigated land increased until the 1990s. And since that time, it's stabilized. And you note that the U.S. Department of Agriculture reported that in 2024, that irrigation supports more than 54% of the total value of crops in the United States. And the amount of irrigated land is stabilized, the amount of water, though, I'm wondering what's happened with that. Can you tell us, as irrigated land, the amount of it has stabilized, has the amount of water used during irrigation stabilized, increased, or decreased?
Well, thanks for asking. That's a very important question, and actually, it's hard to answer. Well, but you are right. Overall, irrigated land in the U.S. has been relatively stable since the 90s, but irrigation water use has not stabilized in the same way across the U.S. It is a big country. In dry years, we use, as you know, more water for irrigation, and for wet years and normal years, less water. This is obvious, right? Because the role of the irrigation it is to supplement the rainfall rates. However, considering the trend since the 90s, in many regions, water use has stabilized or even decreased. Part of this, it is a positive story. Farmers have adopted more efficient irrigation systems, especially center pivots, low pressure sprinklers, better irrigation scheduling, for example, using soil moisture sensors, remote sensing, and weather data for irrigation scheduling. So today, in many cases, farmers can produce more crop value with the same amount of water or even with less water applied per acre compared to 20, 30 years ago. But there is another side of the story. In some regions, water use has declined because there is simply less water available. Texas is a good example, especially in parts of the high plains, where depletion of the Ogallala aquifer has reduced groundwater availability. Because of that, some irrigated areas have declined and some farmers have had to reduce irrigation, adopt depth irrigation, or shift land back to dry land production, or just sell the land to urbanization, Texas, just you give you an idea, lost about 30% of the irrigated area over the last 20, 25 years, for example. So I would say the national trend is toward more efficient and relatively stabilized irrigation water use. But regionally, the reasons are different. In some places, it's because of better technology and water policy, like Nebraska and California. And other places, it is because water scarcity and groundwater depletion are forcing reductions, like Texas. The main message it is that the future of U.S. irrigation, it is not about simply expanding irrigated land. It is about producing more with limited water, using better technology, better irrigation scheduling, and better ground and surface water management.
So I was kind of, shocked when I saw the figure that you talked about, the I guess about 30% reduction in the amount of farmland in Texas is irrigated over the, period of 2008 to 2023. And, I knew that it had declined. I didn't know it had declined that much. And I appreciate you mentioning Texas up front. Most of my listeners will appreciate that too. But your study, going back to your highlighted findings here, indicates that top irrigated states, the sources of water vary, but groundwater dominates overall. And I guess when we say you're saying they vary for the top irrigated states, I noticed that, California is maybe more surface water than groundwater unless it's dry, right? You get in a drought, but, they're going to groundwater. But, are the top irrigated states mostly in the Western United States?
Yeah, many of the top irrigated states are in the western U.S. and in the Great Plains because it is those states has very low rainfall rates. California and Texas are two major examples, but we also have states like Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Idaho, and Arizona. They are the top states, irrigated states. It's important to remember that irrigation is not only a Western issue. For example, Arkansas is also a very important irrigated state, especially because of rice and other crops such corn and soybeans. In general, irrigation is concentrated in places where rainfall is not enough to meet the crop needs or where rainfall is too variable to support consistent high-yield agriculture. That includes the arid West, the Great Plains, and some areas in the Mississippi Delta. So, when we look at groundwater conservation, the other part of the question, the picture is very diverse. Some states and regions have done a much better job than others over the years. Nebraska, for example, has a strong local groundwater management system through the natural resource districts, which the local authority for groundwater in Nebraska. And this has helped with monitoring, regulating, and allocating the groundwater for long-term planning across Nebraska. Groundwater depletion, it is a serious problem in Texas, and the Texas High Plains is one of the clearest examples. In this region, groundwater from the Ogallala Aquifer has been heavily depleted over the years after decades of intensive irrigation, low natural recharge, and high agricultural water damage. This depletion has already contributed to reductions in irrigated area and has forced many producers to adopt depth irrigation, shift crops, or transition some lands back to dry land production. Kansas and other parts of the southern and central high plains face similar changes. However, the situation in Texas is especially important because groundwater management has historically been influenced by the rule of capture, which is closely associated with the concept of absolute ownership and gives land landowners, broad rights to pump groundwater benefit their land. This legal framework can make it more difficult to limit pumping and can contribute to overuse, although groundwater depletion is also strongly driven by climate, recharge limitations, crop water demands, irrigation development, and local management decisions. So I would not say that the top irrigated states have all followed the same path about groundwater conservation. Some have made progress through stronger water policies, local groundwater management, and improvements in irrigation efficiency. Others have relied for decades on older groundwater doctrines, such as absolute ownership or the rule of capture, and are now facing the consequence of limited recharge, long-term overuse, and declining groundwater availability. The main message is that irrigation efficiency is important. We know that. But efficiency alone, it is not enough. Groundwater conservation also requires strong water governance, monitoring, and limits that keep withdrawals closer to what the aquifer can sustain.
So I have to go way back to the late 90s here, but you mentioned the natural resource districts in Nebraska, and I remember reading about those. And when I was writing my dissertation, I put in there, hey, we ought to think about, trying to migrate to a system like that in Texas, where you have a district that manages groundwater and surface water at the same time. And, we have, I guess, one very small example of that, but in general, we don't have that. And we manage the two resources separately. And as you mentioned, the rule of capture, which, is a tort law, actually, kind of makes doing something like that very difficult, among other things that would make it difficult. But I also wanted to comment on, your mention of Arkansas. And so Arkansas is always, kind of a surprise to me. I spent a lot of time in Arkansas in the winter, and, Arkansas gets a lot of rain. It's subtropical climate, right? It's got major rivers, and it's using an amazing amount of groundwater. Would be in a rice field. It's right on the edge of a river, and there's a huge groundwater well in most of these rice fields, and they're pumping out of the Carrizo Wilcox, and so it surprises me. But my understanding is there really isn't much regulation of groundwater in Arkansas. I mean, it's nothing like the systems that exist in other Western states, as far as I can tell. And so let's go ahead and move on to your next finding here. And that is that corn and soybeans have expanded in terms of irrigated area, while alfalfa, cotton, and rice have declined. And so, I was curious when I heard that or read that, and wondered, does that shift in crop types indicate any trend with regard to crops that require greater or lesser amounts of water via irrigation?
Well, I would be careful not to interpret this a single shift from crops that use more water to crops that use less water. The story is more complex. Corn and soybeans have expanded in irrigated areas because they are major commodity crops. There is a strong market demand, and these crops are related, for example, to beef and ethanol production, and irrigation provides very clear benefits for yield stability, especially in places like Nebraska, Kansas, and other parts of the Great Plains. Population is growing. We need food security. Instead of expanding crop land, probably is much better to invest on irrigation, fertigation to increase the crop yield. Corn can require a significant amount of water, but irrigation is essential to make production much more reliable and profitable. So, at the same time, crops like cotton and rice have declined in irrigated areas for different reasons over the years. Many of these crops are grown in regions where water scarcity, droughts, groundwater depletion, or surface water restriction have become more serious. Rice is highly water dependent and almost entirely irrigated. Right? In California, drought and reduced surface water allocation have forced producers to fallow rice fields in dry years. In the Middle South, including Arkansas and Mississippi, concerns about groundwater depletion in the Mississippi River Valley alluvial aquifer have increased pressure to improve irrigation efficiency and limit long-term overuse. In addition, high production cost and competition with other crops such as soybean, corn, cotton, and sorghum have also contributed to shifts away from rice in some years. Regarding cotton, as we know, cotton is also often grown in dry regions where irrigation water has become more limited, such as in Texas. So the shift tells us that crop decisions are increasingly influenced by water availability, crop markets, products related like ethanol and beef, and risk. Farmers are trying to decide which crops give the best return and the best yield stability per unit of water. In other words, the trend is not only about whether a crop needs more or less water. It's about which crop makes the most sense under limited water, changing markets, and increasing climate variability. It is very complex. It's not just about, water, the market, commodities prices.
So I'm, curious, is growing two crops a year, is that pretty common in a lot of places? Or is that, I wasn't familiar with that. And when I originally started working in water in the 80s, and then saw that was becoming much more commonplace. And so I'm just curious, do you see that throughout most of the United States where there's irrigation?
Well, you mean, so places like California, they irrigated over year round. So they have the same irrigated land of Nebraska, the same area, the same irrigated area. However, California use like 3 times more water because the Mediterranean climate in California makes California produce twice, 3 times in a year. And then the issue with groundwater depletion in California is more serious. In Nebraska, we have a lot of water from the Ogallala aquifer, and during the winter, there is no irrigation in Nebraska. And then in this time of year, the aquifer recharge from the snow, precipitation and everything, which makes Nebraska special because during the irrigation season, we have water because we irrigated like just 3-4 months per year. The rest of the year, the aquifer recharge, know.
Right. Yeah, I guess where you've got a long growing season, you've got more opportunity to raise crops throughout the year. So your study found that low flow irrigation methods are rising in terms of being adopted by farmers. And, I was interested in that in terms of, how would you characterize their use overall? I mean, I understand that more and more farmers are using them, but is it half of the farmers are using them, or is it most farmers are using for irrigation? And in the West, I mean, to me, it seems like everybody's got to be using that, but maybe not. So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, we have a lot of technologies available for irrigation scheduling, and everything to do a better irrigation management, but only a small part of the irrigators, the growers has been using this technology. Well, I would say about the irrigation methods, for example, I would say low flow irrigation methods like micro irrigation are increasing. Today, we have like almost 7-8 million acres irrigated by low flow methods, especially California and Washington states, right? But adoption is still very regional and crop specific, such as as I said, California with vegetables and orchards. Well, in high value crops, drip and subsurface drip irrigation are more common because the economic return can also justify the investment. It is not that cheap, In places where water is limited or energy costs are high, growers have a strong incentive to adopt low pressure system. However, in grain producing regions such as Nebraska in the Corn Belt, where corn and soybeans dominate, the most common and best adapted irrigation system is the center pivot. For these crops and field scale, micro irrigation systems usually do not justify the cost. Center pivots are more practical for large grain fields, easier to manage, and are very highly efficient, actually, when equipped with motor low-pressure sprinkler packages. So the efficiency for a center pivot could be 85 and 90%, for example. So while low flow irrigation is expanding, we see this trend across the US in some regions and crops. Center pivots irrigation remains the dominant and most suitable system in the US for large-scale corn and soybean production. For example, center pivot today we have like 32 million acres with center pivots. Now, regarding the irrigation scheduling tech, I would not say that most irrigators everywhere are using the most advanced technologies. We have the technologies available, but unfortunately, as I said, they are not actually using, most irrigators not using this technology. Soil moisture sensors are one of the leading tools for irrigation, for scheduling. On average, only about 15% of the irrigators use soil moisture sensors across the US, mainly because their irrigation systems are more suitable for adopting and integrating this technology. But adoption still varies depending on the cost, technical knowledge, farm size, and how much pressure there is on local water resource. Most growers still rely on personal irrigation calendar and soil fields observation, for irrigation scheduling based on their own experience without following the soil type or the weather data, which is not good, However, I see a very positive trend because of that, there are still a lot of room to expand the use of data-driven irrigation scheduling. It's a good opportunity to grow a business in this field, The bigger opportunity now, it is not only having the best irrigation system. You can have the best irrigation system, but the biggest opportunity, in my opinion, is decide more precisely when, where, and how much water to apply. It is about irrigation scheduling, you know?
So your study found that as irrigation shifted eastward, there's a need for development of sustainable water policies that will match that demand that's being placed on water in states to the east. And just kind of looking at that overall, state water policy is more rudimentary in the east, primarily for the reason that water has been scarce in the West since the West was, irrigated or farmed, right? When people started mass farming in the West, irrigation was necessary. And
that's true.
So, there was a need to have some form of government intervention at some level to manage that resource, since everybody's trying to tap at the same time and causing problems in doing so. So, I mean, what changes, if any, do you see, for the eastern United States in terms of water policy, where irrigation is now creating potential shortages?
Yeah, that's a great question, Todd. So historically, water policy in the east of the U.S. has been less intensive because water has generally been more available, right? In the West, scarcity forced states to develop a stronger system for water rights, allocation, reservoir, monitoring, and regulations. But as irrigation slowly expands eastward, even though this shift is still relatively small and slow, I believe this trend will become more important in the future. Many farmers in the east and middle western states may have enough rainfall in normal years, but during years with low rainfall, with long period of drought, irrigation can make a major difference in maintaining yield stability. This is very important. Iowa, I would like to say Iowa because it is a good example. Even though Iowa has a relatively small irrigated area compared to the other states in the West, it's the largest corn producing states in the U.S. In years of severe drought, such as back in 1980s and 2012, it was a very dry years, right? Corn productivity in Iowa and across the Corn Belt can decline sharply, affecting total U.S. corn production and market price, impacting other products such as beef and gas, right? Because we use corn to feed livestock, to produce ethanol, impacting the gas price also and the beef price. So in this context, irrigation in the eastern and midwestern U.S., it is not necessarily about irrigating every year like in the arid West. It can be a risk management strategy to protect yield during dry years and reduce losses associated with climate variability, which becoming more consistent every year, right? We have seen this. So at the same time, if irrigation keeps expanding eastward without planning, local water resources can come under pressure, especially during drought years when many producers may need water at the same time. The goal is not necessarily to copy Western water regulations because the climate and the hydrology are different. But the East has an opportunity to learn from the West and build proactive water policies before irrigation growth creates long-term water conflicts. We don't want a water conflicts, right? It's much easier to act earlier to avoid water issues in the future.
Yeah, that's something I've often wondered about, whether states in the eastern U.S. were looking at what's happened in the western United States and thinking about what they're going to be needing to handle in the future, and have concluded that, hey, we really need to find some expertise in the western United States to come help us, avoid some mistakes made in the West, right? We're, as somebody who's been working in Western water for a long time, I know a lot of things that you shouldn't do. That people probably,
that's true.
It'd be helpful to hear, before they go on and do them.
Right now, the Colorado River Basin, for example, they are struggling a lot. Drought,
right.
Severe drought, water restriction. What about food security,
Yeah. So the eastward shift in irrigated agriculture in the U.S., does that reflect, we've talked a little bit about this already in terms of the demand determining what's happening there, but is the type of crops that are being grown in the East also reflect changes in irrigated agriculture in the West? In other words, water's becoming more scarce. You already mentioned, the 30% reduction in irrigated farmland in Texas and in some other places. And is the, reaction in the East, or what's happening in the East, a reaction to that to some degree?
Well, we have seen this trend. The main driver is not necessarily a major change in the crop type. It is more related, I believe, to rainfall variability, drought risk, and the need to stabilize crop production. In many eastern and Midwest states, crops like corn and soybeans are still mostly rain-fed with high yields. We see Iowa. Iowa has the same or even high corn yields than Nebraska, and most of the fields in Iowa is rain-fed, and most of the fields in Nebraska is under irrigation, right? That's amazing for Iowa. Yeah. So, however, in a normal year, rainfall may be enough, right? But during dry years, or when drought happens during critical crop growth stage, yield losses can be very significant. So, irrigations in the East is often not about irrigating every year like in the West. It is more of a risk management tool. It gives farmers a way to protect yield when rainfall is below normal. So Iowa, like Illinois and Minnesota, are good examples. Think about that. These states do not have large irrigated areas compared with Nebraska, California, or Texas, but they are among the most important corn and soybean producing states in the U.S. So, if one or more of these states experience severe drought and yield decline greatly, that can affect national production and even market prices. In that situation, irrigation could help reduce losses related to climate variability and provide more stability for corn production. So, I would say the eastward shift is still relatively small, but it shows that irrigation may become more important in humid and sub-humid regions as rainfall becomes more variable and producers look for ways to stabilize production.
Well, that's what I was wondering, Emmy, and just kind of summarize what you said. I mean, you're essentially saying that as the climate becomes more variable, even areas that get a lot of rain, typically they're going to have the technology because, year in and year out, the conditions could be so different, and there's so much depending on their production that they're going to have the technology whether you're using it or not in a specific year.
Yeah, climate variability has been a big issue, and it's getting worse and worse and worse years after year.
Well, Ivo, let's move to our final question. How can our listeners find out more about your research at the University of Nebraska and about any upcoming events that you might want to mention? Hint, hint.
Okay, first of all, I would like thank you so much, Todd, for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be part of this podcast. Thank you so much. Well, the best way to learn more about our research is through the University of Nebraska and the Dirty Water for Food Global Institute websites and the social medias, where we share information about our projects, publications, and research activities. I would like also take advantage to share our upcoming event that is the first Center Pivot Irrigation Technology Training in 2027 in Lincoln, Nebraska, from June 28th to July 1st, 1 year from now. Save the dates. This training will be held in the heart of the Center Pivot Irrigation country, bringing participants together with leading professionals, researchers, industries, representatives, and irrigators. This will be a unique opportunity to learn, exchange experience, and build a strong professional network.
Ivo, that sounds like really interesting information, and I'm going to add some links to the notes on this episode, and I'll put one in there for your conference too, if you've got one.
Please, thank you so much.
Sure, as well as links to the program at Nebraska. So. Hey, thanks again. I really enjoyed talking with you. And as I said at the beginning, I read your article and was like, I love all this stuff that I'm wondering about. And here you and your co-authors have written it down for us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Todd.
This has been Talk+Water. My guest today was Ivo Zution Gonçalves, who is an agronomist, engineer, and research assistant professor with the Dirty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska. I also want to thank you, the listener, for spending your valuable time on this podcast. Finally, I want to give a big thank you to Anna Jones and Sarah Wingfield at the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University for getting each episode of Talk+Water ready to flow. If you've enjoyed our discussion today, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review to let us know how we did. This is Todd Bottler. Let's talk water again soon.